Mrs. Mercer, you need to come up here right now. Whatever your husband packed into the East crawl space, it isn't legal. The insurance appraiser stood on the top rung of the pull-down ladder, his heavy Maglite flashlight shaking violently in his grip. The harsh LED beam cut through the thick, aggressively dusty air of my hallway, illuminating millions of dancing motes of drywall particulate. The attic above radiated a suffocating, oppressive heat, baking under the July sun. I was 28 years old, my muscles aching from 3 straight hours of contorting myself under a sink. I was covered in dry, chalky plaster dust from patching a massive hole in the downstairs bathroom, wearing stained, threadbare yoga pants, and holding a lukewarm mug of cheap, bitter black coffee. The severe Midwest storm that had torn the shingles off our roof the night before was supposed to be the biggest headache of my week. I had already spent 2 hours on hold with State Farm, listening to elevator music that sounded like a dirge. It wasn't. "What do you mean, not legal?" I called up to him, wiping a streak of plaster from my forehead with the back of my wrist. Like, building code illegal? Did he run unpermitted wiring? "No, ma'am," the appraiser said, his voice dropping an octave, tight with sudden, unmistakable anxiety. "Like federal prison illegal. You need to see this." "I'm covered in wet plaster," I argued, my patience fraying at the edges. "Can't you just bring it down?" "I am not touching that thing again," he shot back, his knuckles turning white where he gripped the aluminum ladder. "I'm not putting my fingerprints on it. Get up here, now." I set my mug down on the hallway console table. A cold spike of dread pierced through the humid air of the house. I climbed the ladder, the rungs groaning under my weight, the smell of ancient insulation and hot, dry wood filling my lungs. The appraiser didn't say another word. He didn't have to. The grim, tight line of his mouth communicated everything I needed to know. He just pointed his trembling light into the far corner of the attic, behind a haphazard stack of mothball-scented winter coats and plastic tubs of holiday decorations. There, shoved underneath a loose floorboard that had been meticulously, expertly pried up and set back down, was a heavy, military-grade titanium encrypted hard drive. It was cold and gray, resting ominously on top of a single, handwritten, black leather ledger. 72 hours later, a federal agent was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at that exact drive. The ambient hum of my refrigerator felt deafening in the silence. The kitchen smelled of the fresh bleach I had used to scrub the counters earlier that morning, a nervous habit. "You're telling me you found this under a floorboard?" Agent Miller asked, his eyes narrowing as he traced the titanium casing with a gloved finger. "Pried up and set back down," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Meticulous work, really. He used finishing nails so the heads wouldn't reflect the light of a flashlight." "And he has absolutely no idea you have it?" "He thinks it's gathering dust right next to our artificial Christmas tree. He hasn't been in that attic in 2 years. Agent Miller slowly opened the black ledger. He flipped through 3 pages, his eyes scanning the columns of meticulously recorded offshore wire transfers. When he finally looked up, he slowly took off his wire-rimmed glasses, massaged the bridge of his nose, and let out a low, long whistle. "Mrs. Mercer," Miller said quietly, the gravity of the situation settling over the room like lead. "The numbers in this ledger. This isn't a side hustle. This is a syndicate. He's moving millions." "I know," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "That's why I called you, Agent Miller. I don't want him fined. I want him buried." Miller looked at me, really looked at me, and nodded once. But Hayes, my husband, had absolutely no idea his entire empire had just collapsed. He was at work, probably laughing his effortless, charming laugh, probably drinking a $6 artisanal latte, completely and utterly unaware that the countdown clock on his freedom had just hit 0. To understand how I burned his life to the ground, to understand why this specific moment was the most poetically devastating thing that could have possibly happened, you need to know what I do for a living. My name is Kaylin. I am a licensed private investigator in Des Moines, Iowa. I don't find missing dogs, and I don't work glamorous, high-stakes murder cases. For the last 6 years, I have made my living entirely in the dark, sticky gutters of human deception. I catch workers' comp fraudsters carrying 70-pound flat-screen televisions to their trucks after swearing to a judge they shattered their lumbar spines. I track arrogant corporate embezzlers who genuinely think a secondary Proton mail address makes them invisible to forensic accounting. And, most frequently, most exhaustingly, I follow cheating spouses. I know exactly what an affair looks like. I know the distinct, sterile scent of high-end hotel soap that lingers aggressively on a cotton collar. I know the specific, guilty, overly explanatory cadence of a man explaining why he simply had to work late on a Friday night during a holiday weekend. I know that a sudden, unprompted gift of expensive jewelry is almost never an act of spontaneous, overwhelming love. It is an act of localized, desperate panic. It is a bribe to the subconscious. I didn't learn how to spot a lie in a sterile police academy classroom or from a textbook on behavioral psychology. I spent my entire childhood learning how to spot a lie in the dim, dust-choked air of my father's pawn shop on the ragged edge of the city. We weren't destitute, but the specter of poverty was always breathing down our necks. My dad checked the price tags on store-brand cereal like he was defusing a highly volatile bomb. He spent 10 agonizing hours a day negotiating with desperate, sweating, twitchy people trying to sell him stolen Makita power tools and fake gold Rolexes. I used to sit behind the reinforced, smudged, bulletproof glass counter, doing my middle school pre-algebra homework under the flickering, buzzing neon lights, watching him work. The shop always smelled of old brass, gun oil, and desperation. He never listened to their elaborate sob stories. He watched their hands. "People lie with their mouths, Kaylin," he would tell me, wiping down the glass with a rag soaked in cheap blue window cleaner, the sharp smell of ammonia burning my nose. "But how do you know the watch is fake, Dad?" I asked, chewing on the end of my pencil. "It looks exactly like the picture in the magazine." "Because he's holding it like it's cheap," my father replied, his eyes never leaving the customer pacing near the door. "Watch his thumbs." "His thumbs are just resting on the dial." "Exactly," my dad said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "If it was a real Rolex, a $10,000 piece of machinery, he'd be gripping it like a lifeline. He'd be terrified of dropping it on this concrete floor. Watch how fast he reaches for the cash when I offer him $50. "You're only giving him 50? I asked, my 12-year-old sense of justice flaring. He asked for 500. "I'm giving him a lesson, kiddo. The hands always tell the truth. The mouth builds the fantasy, but the hands live in reality." I absorbed that lesson deep into my marrow. It became my invisible superpower, a lens through which I viewed the entire world. I developed a hyper-awareness of spatial anomalies and microscopic behavioral shifts. I notice when a heavy oak chair has been moved exactly 1 inch from its usual indented spot on a carpet. I notice when the ambient gray dust on a top shelf has been disturbed by a passing sleeve. I notice when someone's baseline blink rate spikes from a relaxed 14, blinks a minute to a frantic 30 during a casual conversation about their weekend plans. When I was 22, freshly graduated with a useless degree in criminal justice, I got my PI license under the mentorship of a grizzled, deeply cynical, chain-smoking retired detective named Sal. Sal operated out of a depressing strip mall office next to a failing dry cleaner. His office smelled permanently of stale tobacco, black licorice, and the sharp ozone tang of a dying Xerox copy machine. Sal was the one who taught me the golden rule of surveillance. He told me it on my very first day, slapping a stack of grainy, blurry photographs across his incredibly cluttered, coffee-stained desk. A liar always builds his cage exactly 1 inch too small, Sal croaked, lighting a Pall Mall cigarette with a cheap plastic lighter that sparked 3 times before catching. What does that mean? I asked, squinting at the photos. They showed a blurry man in a trench coat standing outside a motel room. It means they think they're geniuses, kid, Sal said, blowing a stream of blue smoke toward the yellowing ceiling tiles. They build a perfect alibi, solid steel bars, airtight schedules, burner phones. They think they've constructed an impenetrable fortress of bullshit. But they mess up? They always leave one gap, Sal said, tapping a thick, calloused finger against the photograph. One tiny little gap they think nobody will ever notice. Because arrogance makes you blind. They underestimate the observer. So we just look for the gap, I said, feeling like I was finally understanding the game. No, kid, Sal laughed, a wet, hacking sound. We wait for them to squeeze through it. Then we slam the damn door behind them. I didn't fully understand the terrifying weight of it then. I had no idea how much that one specific sentence would matter to my own psychological survival. Because of my job, I saw the absolute worst of humanity, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. I watched beautiful families implode through the highly magnified lens of a Nikon D850 from the cramped, freezing front seat of my Honda Civic. I listened to people actively, maliciously destroy each other in family court, weaponizing their own children over alimony payments. Because of that constant exposure to the darkest facets of the human heart, I desperately, achingly wanted my own home to be a blind spot. I wanted a sanctuary where I didn't have to be a detective. I wanted to turn off the analytical, hyper-vigilant part of my brain the second I walked through my front door. And then I met Hayes. And for the first time in my entire life, I put away my magnifying glass. I locked it in a mental drawer and threw away the key. I was so spectacularly wrong. I met him at a crowded, overly loud coffee shop in the East Village on a freezing Tuesday in November. The wind outside was a brutal, howling Iowa gale that rattled the plate glass windows, and the inside smelled overwhelmingly of burnt espresso beans, cinnamon, and wet wool overcoats. I was exhausted to my core, coming off a brutal 14-hour overnight stakeout, tracking a fraudulent disability claimant. I was running on pure acidic caffeine and spite, shivering in my damp jacket. I was standing in line, staring blankly at the menu board, when a man in a tailored, incredibly expensive-looking charcoal overcoat turned around entirely too fast and spilled half of his scalding iced Americano directly onto my favorite leather boots. The icy liquid soaked instantly through the leather, chilling my toes. I gasped, stepping back. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," the man said. That was Hayes. I looked down at my ruined boots, too tired to even summon real anger. Well, that's one way to wake me up. Please tell me those aren't real leather, he pleaded, his face flushed with genuine mortification. Or at least tell me they're heavily waterproofed. They are real Italian leather, I sighed, wiping the toe with a brown paper napkin. And they were perfectly dry about 5 seconds ago. I'm an absolute idiot, he groaned, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He knelt down, right there on the dirty coffee shop floor, and started dabbing at the leather with a stack of napkins. I turned around too fast. Let me pay for the cleaning, and your coffee, please. It's the least I can do to avoid bad karma. I'm Hayes. I looked down at him. He had a self-deprecating smile that completely disarmed my usual defensive perimeter. I'm Kaylin, and I take my coffee black, no sugar, just like my mood right now. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that cut through the ambient noise of the shop. He bought my coffee, and we stood by the pickup counter talking for an hour. He was charming, aggressively articulate, and completely fascinated by my job. Most men were deeply intimidated when I told them I was a private investigator. They would immediately cross their arms, lean back, and make nervous, defensive jokes about me running background checks on them. Hayes didn't. He leaned in. He asked highly intelligent, specific questions about skip tracing databases, surveillance law, and asset tracking. He told me he worked in freight brokering and corporate logistics. He said he moved massive amounts of boring things from point A to point B. Looking back, with the clarity of hindsight, the warning was right there, flashing in brilliant neon red. He wasn't fascinated by my job because he admired me as a professional. He was fascinated because he was studying my methods. He was gathering tactical intel on the enemy. I chose to see it as quirky, supportive curiosity. Our first 2 years were beautiful. God, they were beautiful. I need to establish that, because if I don't, none of the rest of this makes any logical sense. He didn't start as a monster. He started as the man who would drive his truck through a blinding, white-out Iowa blizzard just to bring me hot, spicy pad thai when I was stuck on a miserable surveillance gig outside a motel. He used to leave small, yellow sticky notes on the cold steering wheel of my Civic. Drive safe. You're my only truth. I found out much later he was writing the exact same poetic notes for her, usually an hour before he came home to crawl into bed with me. The changes didn't happen overnight. They never do. Infidelity is not a sudden explosion. It is a slow, creeping, silent rot in the floorboards. It hollows out the foundation before you even notice the house is tilting. The first red flag happened at dinner, about 3 years into our marriage. We were at Django, an upscale, perpetually noisy French restaurant downtown, celebrating my 26th birthday. The air smelled of heavy garlic butter, red wine, and searing steak. The clinking of crystal glasses provided a constant, lively soundtrack. I had just finished telling him a story about a particularly ridiculous insurance fraud case involving a man who claimed his prized show ferret was stolen. His phone buzzed on the table. It was face up, resting next to his water glass. I didn't mean to look, but my eyes naturally tracked the sudden burst of light. A text message flashed on the lock screen from a contact simply named J Logistics. The message read, "Missing you at the site." Hayes grabbed the phone with a speed that defied casual movement. It was a sharp, panicked snatch, like a man grabbing a falling knife. He flipped it face down against the white linen tablecloth, his knuckles turning stark white for a fraction of a second. His pupils dilated. His posture went instantly rigid. "Work," he said smoothly, taking a long, deliberate sip of his Cabernet. One of the new dispatchers. Long, total nightmare. I felt a cold, sharp prickle of sweat form at the base of my neck. The PI instinct, the dormant beast I fought every single day to suppress in my own home, woke up, bared its teeth, and slammed its fists against the inside of my skull. "Missing you at the site is not a text you send a freight broker about a delayed shipment." "A dispatcher named J Logistics?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain light, conversational. "Yeah, Jim," Hayes said, not missing a beat, slicing into his steak. "The guy is an absolute mess. Doesn't know how to route a truck to save his life." "Why is he missing you at the site?" I pressed gently. "I thought you were in the downtown office all day." "He meant the loading site down on 4th Avenue?" Hayes replied, his eyes finally meeting mine, projecting pure, practiced innocence. "I had to walk him through a complex manifest issue over the phone. Look, let's not talk about work on your birthday, okay? You look incredibly beautiful tonight." I forced the instinct down. I shoved it back into the box. I smiled. I told myself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. 2 months later, the second sign appeared. The sudden, unexplainable influx of cash. Hayes came home one evening carrying a massive, incredibly heavy cardboard box. He hauled it onto our granite kitchen counter with a grunt. It was a dual-boiler espresso machine, Italian-made, gleaming with polished chrome and heavy brass fittings. Retail price was somewhere around $4,000. We did well financially, but we were strictly a drip coffee household. We had a joint savings account that we monitored obsessively because we were supposedly saving every extra penny to buy a much larger house in the suburbs. "What is that?" I asked, staring at the gleaming chrome monstrosity, the smell of the cardboard box filling the kitchen. "Bonus," he smiled, walking over and kissing my cheek. His lips felt cold. "We landed the Miller Logistics account. The firm gave the senior brokers a massive bump. Thought I'd treat us. You're always complaining about the drip machine." "A $4,000 espresso machine, Hayes?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "I thought we agreed to put everything extra into the house fund." "We are," he insisted, wrapping his arms around my waist. "But you have to live a little, Kaylin. We work too hard not to enjoy the fruits of our labor." "It's not in the joint account," I pointed out. "I checked the balance this morning to pay the property tax." Hayes didn't flinch. He just smiled wider, a perfectly constructed mask of reassurance. "Oh, it was a separate paper check. I routed it to my personal checking account to keep it hidden from the IRS. Less tax liability that way. Don't worry about it. I'll transfer the rest to the house fund next week." If I had been investigating him for a paying client, I would have flagged that excuse immediately in bright red ink. A massive, publicly traded corporate logistics firm does not pay massive cash bonuses under the table to avoid taxes. That is a federal crime. That is an audit waiting to happen. But I was his wife. I loved him. So I drank the $4,000 espresso, tasted the bitter crema on my tongue, and swallowed the lie whole. Then came the scent. It wasn't cheap perfume. I've caught enough cheating husbands to know that the cliché of smelling Chanel No. 5 or Victoria's Secret body spray on a collar is mostly lazy Hollywood fiction. Real, calculated affairs smell like high-end hotel soap. It's a distinct, sterile, heavily perfumed citrus and eucalyptus scent that lingers deep in the woven fabric of a cotton dress shirt. It smells like money and secrecy. He started coming home smelling like it twice a week. He claimed he was hitting the luxury gym downtown after work and using their executive showers because our water pressure at home was acting up. I called the gym the next day, pretending to be a prospective corporate member asking about their locker room amenities. The friendly receptionist proudly told me they used generic bulk soap in their dispensers. Unscented, hypoallergenic. I still didn't confront him. I didn't want the illusion to break. I was a coward in my own life, terrified of the truth I was actively uncovering. The fracture, the agonizing moment the glass finally shattered and could never, ever be put back together, happened at a sweltering 4th of July barbecue hosted by his older brother, Declan. Declan was a loud, abrasive, aggressively mediocre man who worked in corporate sales. He had always treated me with a thin, greasy veneer of polite condescension. He thought my job was an absolute joke, a cute little hobby for a woman who watched too much daytime television. I was standing by the massive red cooler on the wooden deck, grabbing a cold can of sparkling water. The heat of the July sun was beating down on my shoulders, the air thick with the smell of burning charcoal, sizzling fat, and sweet barbecue sauce. Declan walked up, smelling heavily of stale smoke and cheap domestic beer. "So, Kaylin?" Declan smirked, leaning heavily against the wooden deck railing, a half-empty beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "How was having the big empty house to yourself all week while Golden Boy was in Chicago?" The ambient noise of the party, the laughter, the pop music playing from the Bluetooth speaker, the splashing from the pool, seemed to instantly drop to a muted underwater hum. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. My stomach plummeted violently, feeling like a lead weight dropping straight through my pelvis. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. Hayes hadn't been in Chicago. Hayes had told me in excruciating, agonizing detail about a tedious 4-day logistics seminar he was attending in Omaha, Nebraska. He had complained about the drive. He had complained about the hotel. He had even brought me back a cheap plastic keychain from the Omaha Zoo as a joke gift. I looked across the manicured yard. Hayes was standing by the smoking grill, laughing uproariously, expertly flipping burgers with a spatula, looking like the absolute picture of a perfect, devoted, loving husband. "Chicago?" I asked, keeping my voice terrifyingly level, my fingers gripping the icy aluminum can of sparkling water until they ached. I thought the conference was in Omaha. Declan's bleary eyes widened for a fraction of a second. The slip-up registered on his flushed face. He quickly took a long, desperate pull of his beer, his eyes darting away from mine, scanning the yard for an escape route. "Right. Omaha," Declan stammered, his confident smirk vanishing. "Yeah, I always get those Midwest cities mixed up." "You just specifically said Chicago, Declan," I pushed, stepping 1 inch closer to him. "Omaha is 5 hours in the exact opposite direction." "You know me," Declan laughed nervously, backing away. "All those cornfields look the same. Look, I gotta go check the ribs. Catch you later, Kalen." He walked away quickly. Too quickly. I didn't say a single word to Hayes for the rest of the party. I smiled until my jaw ached. I ate a burnt hot dog. I laughed at his recycled jokes. I played the part. But inside my chest, a heavy, cold iron door was sliding shut, sealing off the woman who loved him, leaving only the investigator behind. That night, while Hayes was deeply asleep, breathing softly, his heavy arm draped casually across my waist, I quietly, meticulously slid out of bed. The hardwood floor was cold against my bare feet. I took my laptop into the downstairs bathroom, locked the door with a soft click, and sat on the cold hexagonal tile floor. I did the one thing I promised myself I would never, ever do to my husband. I opened a secure encrypted browser. I ran his license plate through the state toll tag database using my specialized PI credentials. The database took exactly 4 seconds to generate a spreadsheet. I scrolled down to the dates of his supposed Omaha trip. There were no pings heading west on Interstate 80 toward Nebraska. Not a single one. Instead, there were 4 distinct, time-stamped toll charges on the Jane Addams Memorial Tollway, heading straight into the glittering heart of downtown Chicago. I sat there on the bathroom floor, the harsh blue light of the screen illuminating my violently shaking hands. The betrayal was an actual, physical weight on my chest, pressing down on my lungs, making every breath feel like inhaling crushed glass. My mouth went bone dry. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't cry. What I found next? I still can't say it out loud to my friends without my hands shaking, because it wasn't just Chicago. As I expanded the search parameters, digging deeper into the digital footprint of my marriage, I found toll charges spanning back 2 full years. Secret trips to Des Moines suburbs, trips to luxury resort towns, weekend charges all aligning perfectly, beautifully, with the times he told me he was working late, entertaining difficult clients, or attending mandatory team-building retreats. And then, I noticed a recurring, damning charge. Every Tuesday and Thursday, at exactly 4:15 p.m., his car pinged a specific toll booth near an upscale, highly secure, gated community in West Des Moines. The neighborhood was notorious for housing the city's wealthiest real estate developers and corporate executives. The escalation of his cruelty didn't begin with me confronting him. It began with him sensing that I was pulling away, sensing the subtle shift in my body language, and him deciding to assert absolute dominance. He could feel his control slipping, so he tightened his grip. Over the next 3 months, Hayes launched a systematic, calculated campaign of psychological warfare designed to make me feel small, crazy, and utterly dependent on him. It started with small, public disrespects. Beat 1. The dinner party. We were at a lavish dinner party with several of his senior logistics colleagues. The hostess, a polite, soft-spoken woman named Sarah, turned to me and asked how my investigative agency was doing. Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Hayes cut in, loudly pouring himself a heavy glass of cheap Merlot. "Oh, Kaylin's agency is doing fine," he said loudly, his voice booming over the ambient chatter, ensuring the entire long dining table could hear. "Though calling it an agency is a bit of a stretch." "Hayes," I warned softly under my breath, my face flushing. "She basically takes blurry pictures of sad people in cheap motels," he continued, ignoring me completely, grinning at his boss. "It's more of a voyeuristic hobby than a career. I keep telling her to get her real estate license so she can do something productive." The table went dead, agonizingly silent. Sarah offered a weak, deeply uncomfortable laugh, her eyes darting between us. I sat there, my face burning with humiliation, staring down at my plate of dry, tough brisket. The meat tasted like ash in my mouth. Hayes didn't even look at me. He just took a massive bite of food, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just publicly humiliated his wife. Beat 2. Financial control. 2 weeks later, he sat me down at the kitchen table with his laptop open to our joint banking spreadsheet. His face was a mask of deep, manufactured concern. "Your surveillance gigs are stressing you out, Kaylin," he said, using his perfectly modulated, reasonable, soothing tone. The tone he used to calm angry clients. "I'm perfectly fine," I replied defensively. "I just had a long week." "You're not fine," he insisted, leaning forward. "You're always exhausted. You're forgetting things around the house. I think I need to take over the household finances completely." "I'm not handing over my business revenue, Hayes. That's my company." "You just hand over your business revenue, and I'll allocate the funds," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "You're being incredibly paranoid about money lately, and it's unhealthy. You're constantly checking the balances." He was trying to cut off my financial autonomy. He knew, consciously or subconsciously, that if I controlled my own money, I could pack a bag and leave. "I'm not paranoid," I said quietly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You are," he insisted, his voice hardening into something sharp and cold. "You're projecting your filthy job onto our marriage. You see shadows that aren't there. Let me handle this. Trust me." Beat 3. The replacement. I was cleaning out his massive Ford truck on a sweltering Sunday afternoon. He had asked me to run it through the car wash as a favor while he watched a golf tournament. The inside of the cab smelled faintly of his cologne and stale air conditioning. As I was aggressively vacuuming the passenger seat, the plastic nozzle caught on something embedded in the fabric. I pulled it free. It was a single, impossibly long auburn hair woven deeply into the synthetic fabric of the headrest. I have jet black hair, short, cut to my jawline. I sat back on my heels in the hot driveway, holding the strand of hair between my trembling fingers. The PI in me immediately noted the healthy root, the thick texture, the exact, expensive-looking shade of copper auburn. I found a plastic sandwich bag in the glove compartment, dropped the hair inside, and sealed it. I was collecting physical evidence against my own life. I shoved the bag deep into my pocket and finished vacuuming, my vision blurring with hot, unshed tears. Beat 4. The public humiliation at the company gala. It was an annual charity event hosted by his massive firm at a downtown luxury hotel. I bought a new, expensive black dress. I spent 2 hours doing my makeup, carefully contouring my face, applying a dark, smoky eye. I wanted to feel beautiful. I wanted to remind him of who I was. I wanted to fight for my marriage. We walked into the glittering, chandelier-lit ballroom, and within 10 minutes, he abandoned me at a small, wobbly table near the back doors. I sat alone for 45 agonizing minutes, nursing a sweating glass of sparkling water, watching him across the massive room. He was standing by a towering, intricate ice sculpture of a swan, laughing uproariously with a woman I had never seen before. She was tall, striking, wearing a skin-tight emerald green dress with sharp, predatory features and long, flowing, auburn hair. I didn't need to ask who she was. The spatial distance between them was absolute zero. They were standing deep within each other's intimate zones, their bodies angled perfectly toward one another. As I watched, he reached out and touched the bare small of her back, a gesture lasting precisely 2.5 seconds. Too long for a professional colleague, too familiar for a casual friend. I stood up. I walked over to them, my heels clicking silently against the thick carpet. I didn't cause a scene. I just stood next to him, a cold ghost haunting his party. Hayes flinched visibly when he saw me, his hand dropping from her back like he had been burned. "Kaylin, this is Juliet. She's the lead developer on the new West Side commercial project we're brokering." Juliet looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my dress with a microscopic sneer. She had the emotional depth of a puddle in a strip mall parking lot. She offered a bright red smile that didn't come close to reaching her cold eyes. "Oh, the private eye," Juliet purred. "Hayes tells me you have a very active imagination." "I wouldn't call it imagination," I said, my voice dead, flat. "I deal entirely in facts." "Well, try not to investigate us too hard tonight," Juliet smirked, taking a sip of her champagne. "We're just celebrating a massive quarter." I looked at Hayes. He looked away, staring intensely at the ice sculpture. When we got to the quiet, dark confines of the car that night, I finally snapped. "Who is she, Hayes?" He slammed his heavy hands against the leather steering wheel, the horn letting out a brief, sharp honk. "Stop interrogating me, Kaylin. God, you are suffocating." "You were practically wearing her as a suit jacket, Hayes. Don't insult my intelligence." "She is a business partner," he roared, his face twisting in genuine, terrifying rage. "You're projecting your filthy little job onto our marriage because you're deeply, pathetically insecure. I am sick of being treated like one of your targets." Beat 5. The spatial violation. I came home from a miserable, freezing 12-hour day of surveillance to find my home office completely, systematically dismantled. My heavy oak desk had been dragged out to the dusty garage. My locked filing cabinets, containing highly sensitive client data, were shoved into the damp laundry room next to the bleach. The spare bedroom, which had been my absolute sanctuary, was now totally empty, except for a cheap yoga mat and a small, trickling indoor water fountain. "What did you do to my office?" I asked, staring at the empty room, the smell of fresh lavender room spray turning my stomach. "It's a meditation room now," Hayes called casually from the kitchen, chopping vegetables. "Your gear was cluttering up the house. It's bad energy." "You moved my confidential client files into the laundry room?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Hayes, that's illegal." I locked the cabinet. "You need to calm down, Kaylin. You're getting hysterical over some filing cabinets. It's our house. And frankly, the murder boards were ruining the aesthetic. Look at the fountain. It's very calming." I walked into the empty room. I knelt down on the carpet where my desk used to be. The vacuum hadn't quite reached the corner near the baseboard. There, sitting innocently against the white trim, was a small gold tube of expensive lip gloss. Fenty Beauty, shade uncensored, a deep, aggressive, unapologetic red. I don't wear red lip gloss. Juliet did. At the gala. He hadn't just moved my things to hurt me. He had brought her into our home, into my sacred space. While I was out working to pay our mortgage, she was in my house. Beat 6. The ally attack. I tried, in a moment of pure desperation, to talk to Declan. I thought, foolishly, that his older brother might have some buried shred of moral decency. I called him and asked to meet for coffee at a neutral diner. I sat across from him in a sticky vinyl booth. I told him I thought Hayes was having an affair. I told him I was scared. Declan slowly stirred his black coffee, refusing to look me in the eye. Look, Kaylin, Hayes is a provider. He works incredibly hard for you. That doesn't answer my question, Declan. Has he talked to you about a woman named Juliet? Declan sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound. You need to stop suffocating him. Nobody else would put up with a wife who acts like a cop 24/7. If he's looking somewhere else, maybe you should ask yourself why your home isn't welcoming anymore. Maybe wear something other than sweatpants when he gets home. He knew. Declan knew absolutely everything, and he was actively, aggressively covering for him. The fraternal enabler system was fully operational. I was completely alone. Beat 7. The institutional threat. Hayes realized I wasn't backing down. I was asking too many specific questions about the household finances, about the missing money from the joint account, about the sudden spikes in his mileage. He cornered me in the kitchen one morning before work. He backed me against the cold granite counter, leaning in uncomfortably close. He smelled of expensive cologne and mint toothpaste. His voice dropped to a terrifyingly calm, dead register. Let me make something very clear to you, Kaylin. He whispered softly. I know you've been checking my toll tags. I saw the browser history on the shared tablet. If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't matter. I shot back, though my knees were trembling. If you ever use your little PI tools to harass me or my colleagues again, he continued, pressing his hand flat against the counter beside my hip, trapping me. I will report you to the state licensing board. I have friends on that board. I will tell them you are using state databases for personal stalking. I will make sure you lose your license, your business, and everything you've built. Do you understand me? He was threatening my livelihood. He was weaponizing my own hard-won profession against me to protect his mistress. Beat 8. The freezing rain. It was a Tuesday night in late October. It was raining. A freezing, miserable, relentless Iowa downpour that turned the streets into slick black mirrors. My phone rang violently at 9 p.m. It was the downtown hospital. My father had collapsed behind the counter at the pawn shop. A minor heart attack. He was stable, but they needed me there immediately. I panicked. I couldn't breathe. I called Hayes. It went straight to voicemail. I called again, my fingers slipping on the screen. Voicemail! I pulled up the location tracking app we shared on our phones, the one he insisted we download for safety. It showed his phone sitting stationary at a boutique luxury hotel downtown. I drove to the hospital first, my wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. I ran into the sterile, brightly lit emergency room. I saw my dad. He was pale, frail, hooked up to a dozen beeping monitors, smelling of antiseptic. But he squeezed my hand with surprising strength and told me to go home and rest. Once I knew he was truly safe, the adrenaline crashed out of my system, leaving behind pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. I drove to the boutique hotel. I parked my unremarkable Honda Civic in the dark shadows across the street. I bought a large, greasy carton of fries from a 24-hour drive-thru down the block. I sat in my freezing car, the heater broken, eating cold, salty fries, watching the illuminated glass entrance of the hotel through the rain-streaked windshield. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the automatic sliding doors parted. Hayes walked out into the cold night. Juliet was with him. She was wearing his charcoal overcoat draped over her shoulders against the rain. He smiled at her. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. He called her an Uber on his phone, waited patiently until she was safely inside the car, and then walked alone to his truck. I sat there, 28 years old, watching my marriage die in real time under the harsh glare of streetlights. I didn't cry. The tears were completely gone. What replaced them was a cold, absolute, terrifying clarity. Beat 9. The invasion. I didn't confront him when he finally sneaked into bed at 3 a.m., smelling of rain and hotel soap. I pretended to be deeply asleep. But the next afternoon, I came home early from a surveillance job. I walked up the stairs quietly. I found Hayes sitting on the floor of our bedroom. He had my heavy, reinforced Pelican case, the one I used to transport highly sensitive physical evidence for clients, between his knees. He was actively trying to force a thick paperclip into the master lock, his face twisted in concentration. "What exactly are you doing, Hayes?" I asked from the doorway. He jumped violently, dropping the paperclip onto the carpet. "Jesus, Kaylin, you startled me!" "You're trying to pick the lock on my evidence case," I said, my voice dangerously flat. "I was looking for a spare charging cable," he stammered, his face flushing dark red. "I thought you might have one in here." "You were picking a master lock with a paperclip to find a phone charger?" "You lock everything up like a paranoid freak," he exploded, immediately shifting to the offensive. "It's insulting! You live in a shared house, Kaylin, not a CIA black site. I am your husband." "It's client confidentiality, Hayes. It's the law." "It's a sickness!" he yelled, standing up and pointing a finger at my chest. "You don't trust me, and frankly, your lack of trust, your constant snooping, is destroying this marriage." He stormed past me, shoulder-checking me on his way out of the room. He was projecting so hard he was practically a movie theater. Beat 10. The breaking point. The next morning, after he left for work, I walked over to his canvas gym bag, which he had carelessly tossed onto the bedroom floor the night before. I unzipped the side pocket. The bag smelled of stale sweat, ozone, and that damned citrus soap. Inside, crumbled up in a tight, damp ball underneath a pair of athletic socks, was a piece of paper. A receipt. I smoothed it out on the bedspread. It wasn't a receipt for a fancy dinner. It wasn't a receipt for a luxury hotel room. It was a wire transfer confirmation slip from a local commercial credit union. The sender was an LLC I didn't recognize. Apex Logistics Solutions. The receiver was a numbered offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The amount transferred was exactly $178,500. I stared at the black ink on the crumpled paper. My PI brain engaged instantly, shifting gears with a loud, mechanical click. Hayes was a freight broker. He made a very good salary, but he did not have $178,000 in liquid cash lying around to wire offshore on a random Wednesday. This wasn't just a dirty little affair anymore. This was massive embezzlement. This was corporate fraud. That was the exact moment the crying, heartbroken victim in me died, and the cold, calculating strategist took the wheel. I carefully took out my phone, wiped the lens on my shirt, snapped a high-resolution, perfectly lit photo of the receipt, and put the paper exactly back where I found it, down to the millimeter. I am a private investigator. I destroy liars for a living, and my arrogant, cheating husband had just handed me a match to burn his entire life to the ground. What nobody knew, what Hayes didn't know, what Declan didn't know, what Juliet didn't know, what Agent Miller hadn't fully grasped yet, was that the appraiser finding the titanium drive in the attic didn't happen yesterday. That happened exactly 3 months ago. When the sweating appraiser handed me that heavy drive and the black ledger, I didn't call Hayes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I washed the plaster off my hands, changed into clean clothes, and took the drive straight to Sal's smoky office in the dying strip mall. "He's cheating on me, Sal," I told him, walking in and dropping the heavy titanium drive onto his cluttered desk with a loud thud. "And he's stealing a massive amount of money." Sal didn't flinch. He didn't offer worthless pity. Pity is completely useless to a PI. It clouds the judgment. He just looked at my face, took a long drag of his cigarette, and slowly stood up. "Sit down, kid," Sal rasped. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell," I said, my hands shaking as I gripped the back of the chair. "I need you to open this." Sal picked up the drive, turning it over in his calloused hands. "Military-grade titanium. Where the hell did Loverboy get this?" "I don't know. He hid it under the floorboards in the crawl space." Sal grunted. He walked over to a small mini-fridge, poured 2 heavy glasses of cheap, burning scotch, slid one across the desk to me, and plugged the drive into a heavily encrypted offline terminal he kept hidden in the back room. "Give me 3 days," Sal said. "And drink the scotch. You're shaking so bad you're vibrating." It took Sal exactly 3 days to crack the password. When he finally called me back to the office, the contents of that drive were laid out on his monitors like a masterclass in arrogant corporate stupidity. Hayes and Juliet weren't just sleeping together in expensive boutique hotels. They were running a massive, highly coordinated kickback scheme. Juliet, acting as the lead real estate developer for her firm, was awarding massive, multi-million-dollar freight and logistics contracts exclusively to Hayes's firm. In return, Hayes was wildly, aggressively overcharging Juliet's firm's clients for the freight shipments, sometimes marking up the shipping costs by 300%. He was taking the massive excess profit, funneling it quietly through 3 dummy LLCs he had set up in Delaware, and kicking exactly half the stolen money back to Juliet's offshore accounts. The $178,500 wire transfer I had found the crumpled receipt for? That was just 1 single quarter's worth of stolen funds being moved to a protected account in the Caymans. I was basically funding my own betrayal, paying the mortgage on the house where he plotted his crimes, which is just incredibly poor financial planning on my part. This is where my profession became the precise, sharpened weapon that would utterly annihilate him. A normal, heartbroken wife might have taken the drive straight to a divorce lawyer. A divorce lawyer would have used it as leverage to get a highly favorable financial settlement, the house, and alimony. I didn't want a settlement. I didn't want the house. I wanted a public execution. I went to work. I used every single piece of expensive skip tracing software I had access to. I traced the dummy LLCs directly to a registered agent in downtown Des Moines. The address for the registered agent wasn't an office. It was a P.O. box at a rundown post office. I sat in my freezing Honda Civic for 14 straight hours outside that post office, drinking black coffee, urinating in a plastic bottle, until I finally photographed Juliet, wearing designer sunglasses, unlocking the box and taking out the bank statements. I had them. I had the massive paper trail, the high-resolution photographic evidence, the toll tags proving their secret meetings at the exact times the fraudulent contracts were digitally signed. I remembered Sal's quote, "A liar always builds his cage exactly 1 inch too small." Hayes's cage was perfectly constructed, a masterpiece of corporate fraud, except for one tiny, fatal, arrogant flaw. He had used our shared home internet network to access the offshore account portal. He thought because he used a commercial VPN, he was perfectly safe. But he didn't realize that 2 years ago, I had manually installed a hardware-level packet sniffer directly onto our router motherboard to monitor my own highly sensitive business traffic for security breaches. I had captured every single keystroke he made. I had the passwords. I had the account numbers. I had everything. I spent the next 2 excruciating months playing the role of the submissive, totally oblivious, apologetic wife. I packed his lunches. I ironed his expensive cotton shirts, ignoring the smell of Juliet's perfume. I smiled and nodded when he talked down to me about my little hobby agency. I made polite, agonizing small talk with Declan at Sunday family dinners, complimenting his dry brisket, all while quietly, legally moving my father's inheritance, my business assets, and my personal savings into an ironclad, blind, protected trust. I filed for a legal separation under a sealed court docket, effectively severing our financial liability the exact moment I had enough evidence. By the time the feds came, I wouldn't lose a single dime. And then I called Agent Miller. Miller was an old FBI contact of Sal's, working out of the white-collar crime division in the Des Moines field office. I handed him the cloned drive, the leather ledger, the hundreds of photos, and a meticulously organized, cross-referenced 40-page dossier detailing every single fraudulent transaction, time-stamped and verified. Miller reviewed the massive file for an hour in absolute silence. He closed the folder, looked up at me with wide eyes, and said, "Mrs. Mercer, you built a better, more watertight case in 2 months than my entire department could have built in a year with a subpoena." "I take my job very seriously, Agent Miller," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "When do we move?" The reversal happened on a perfectly sunny Tuesday. Exactly 10:14 a.m., Juliet's massive real estate firm was hosting a highly publicized ribbon-cutting ceremony for their new joint venture commercial park in West Des Moines. It was a lavish, sickeningly expensive affair. The lobby was all glass and white marble. Caterers in black ties were carrying heavy silver trays of expensive champagne and shrimp cocktail. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the corner. Local politicians were shaking hands and smiling for the cameras. Hayes was completely in his element. He was wearing a custom, perfectly tailored navy suit, standing proudly at the glass podium right next to Juliet, who was wearing a stunning white dress. Declan was sitting in the front row, cheering loudly, holding a beer. Hayes was actually giving a speech into the microphone about integrity in modern business, the importance of community, and the value of transparent logistics. The absolute staggering audacity of the man. I walked through the heavy double-glass doors of the lobby. I wasn't wearing my usual baggy stakeout gear or paint-stained yoga pants. I was wearing a sharp, tailored, incredibly expensive black suit. My hair was perfect. I wore bright, aggressive red lipstick. Fenty Beauty. Perfect. Shade uncensored. I wasn't alone. Walking exactly one step behind me was Agent Miller, flanked heavily by 2 massive federal marshals wearing dark windbreakers with FBI printed in bright yellow letters across the back. The room was loud, full of thunderous applause as Hayes finished his speech. I walked straight down the center aisle. The crowd naturally parted for me, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. The marshal's presence was an undeniable, terrifying anchor of absolute authority. The string quartet slowly stopped playing, one instrument at a time, until the room was dead silent. Hayes saw me when I was exactly 10 feet away. His brilliant, charming smile faltered, freezing on his face. He looked at me, his brow furrowing in confusion, and then he looked at the stern men standing behind me. The confusion on his handsome face slowly, agonizingly contorted into raw, unadulterated, primal panic. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a dramatic scene. I walked calmly up to the catered table directly below the podium. I slid a thick, heavy manila folder across the crisp, white linen tablecloth. It stopped exactly in front of Juliet. Inside the folder, completely visible to anyone who looked down, was the glossy 8x10 photograph of Juliet opening the P.O. box, placed right next to a printout of the bank routing numbers for the $178,500 Cayman transfer. Juliet looked down. All the color instantly vanished from her perfectly made-up face. She gasped, a sharp, ragged sound. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. It hit the hard marble floor and shattered into 100 pieces, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly silent, cavernous room. Agent Miller stepped past me. He didn't use a microphone, but his deep voice carried easily to the back of the room. Hayes Mercer, Juliet Vance. You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The slow-motion physical reaction of a human being realizing their entire life is over is a deeply fascinating thing to watch. Hayes's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the heavy glass podium to keep from collapsing, the wood and glass groaning under his desperate grip. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, but no sound came out. Sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. His hands, the hands my father told me to always watch, were shaking so violently he couldn't even raise them as the massive marshal stepped forward with the heavy steel handcuffs. What? This is a joke! Hayes finally choked out, his voice cracking. Kaylin, tell them this is a joke. It's not a joke, Mr. Mercer. Put your hands behind your back, the marshal ordered, grabbing Hayes's shoulder and spinning him around. In the front row, Declan stood up, his face pale. He took 3 rapid, panicked steps backward, physically distancing himself from his brother. The eternal enabler, fleeing the sinking ship the second the water touched his shoes. The marshal clamped the cold steel around Hayes's wrists. The sharp, metallic click was loud, final, and incredibly satisfying. Hayes looked over his shoulder at me. His eyes were wide, terrified, pleading like a trapped animal. Kaylin, what did you do? I looked at him. I searched my chest for pity, for love, for sadness. I felt absolutely nothing but the cool, clean, rushing air of freedom. I stopped projecting, Hayes, I said softly, my voice completely steady. You crazy bitch! You set me up! Hayes suddenly screamed, struggling against the marshal, his face turning purple. I'll kill you! Watch your mouth, or I'll add resisting arrest to the federal charges, Miller growled, shoving Hayes forcefully toward the doors. I turned around and walked out of the building. I didn't look back as they read him his Miranda rights in front of his entire company. True power isn't found in a long, screaming monologue. True power is in the absolute, terrifying restraint of walking away. The cascade of his total destruction was absolute and terrifyingly fast. Within 2 weeks, the federal government swooped in and froze every single one of Hayes's assets, including the joint checking account he had arrogantly tried to lock me out of. Because I had legally and quietly separated our finances prior to the grand jury indictment, my business, my trust, and my savings remained entirely untouched by the feds. Within a month, the immense pressure of federal prison broke Juliet. She had absolutely zero loyalty to him. The exact moment the federal prosecutors offered her a slightly reduced sentence, she flipped on Hayes completely. She provided thousands of emails, deleted text messages, and recorded phone calls proving, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he was the primary mastermind behind the overcharging scheme. Declan wasn't spared either. During the exhaustive forensic audit of Hayes's communications, the feds discovered Declan had helped Hayes falsify some minor, but highly illegal, tax documents 2 years prior. Declan was publicly fired from his corporate sales job in disgrace and is currently fighting a massive IRS audit that will likely bankrupt him and take his house. 2 months later, terrified of a jury, Hayes pled guilty to avoid a drawn-out, highly publicized trial. The federal judge was not in a lenient mood. Hayes was sentenced to 41 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of heavily monitored probation. He was ordered to pay back the entire $178,500, plus massive, crippling punitive fines, meaning he will be quietly paying restitution to the government until he is an old, broken man. He tried to call me exactly once, from the county holding facility the night before his permanent transfer to the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth. I answered the phone only because I wanted to hear his defeated voice one last time. "You ruined my life," he whispered into the phone. The line crackled with static. He sounded incredibly small, weak, stripped of all his tailored suits and expensive coffee. "No, Hayes," I replied, staring out the large window of my beautiful new office. "You ruined your life. I just appraised the damage. I loved you." He choked out, crying. "I really did. We could have fixed this." "You loved the blind spot I gave you," I said coldly. "But the blind spot is gone. Have a nice life, Hayes." I hung up the phone and permanently blocked the number. My life is smaller now, but it is entirely, fiercely mine. I use the clean money from my protected trust to buy a small, quiet, beautiful cabin on 10 acres of dense woods just outside the Des Moines city limits. Nobody bothers me out here. The crisp morning air smells like wet pine needles and fresh rain, not cheap cologne and hotel soap. I still work as a PI. In fact, business has never been better. Word gets around incredibly fast in the tight-knit legal community when a private investigator manages to hand-deliver a massive, airtight federal indictment wrapped in a neat little bow. I've tripled my hourly rates, and I turn down any cases that bore me. But I also revived a dream I had put on hold when I married Hayes. I started writing again. I'm taking the wild, absurd, deeply human stories of the cases I've worked over the years and turning them into a true crime book. Sal comes out to the cabin sometimes on lazy Sunday afternoons. We sit on the sprawling back porch, drinking good, expensive scotch, throwing tennis balls for the massive, clumsy rescue dog I adopted. Sal was right. He was always right. A liar always builds his cage exactly 1 inch too small. Hayes thought he was so much smarter than me. He thought because I loved him, I was completely blind to his reality. He forgot that long before I was a wife, I was a quiet little girl sitting behind a smudged, bulletproof pawnshop counter, learning how to watch the hands. My final, lingering image of this whole ordeal isn't the dramatic arrest in the marble lobby. It isn't the sterile courtroom. It's the quiet morning after he was taken away in handcuffs. I woke up in my own bed, in my own house. The bright, warm sun was streaming through the window, catching the millions of floating dust motes in the air, turning them into tiny stars. I walked into the kitchen, made a cheap, bitter cup of black coffee, and stood on the back wooden porch. The Iowa wind blowing across my face was cold, sharp, and incredibly clean. For the first time in 3 long years, I threw my head back and laughed out loud. And it didn't hurt at all.